And this would be interesting, too, because you would think if this is a deal now that Nolan Arenado would reconsider relative to where he was earlier in the offseason back in December when he rejected the trade. He blocked it, but it was widely reported that it was more of a not right now from Nolan, not a never want to go to Houston. And, of course, Katie Woo's article earlier this week explained that one of those 5 teams that was on Nolan's acceptable list for a trade was the Houston Astros. So the fact that, John Mozeliak pursued it to begin with makes sense given that little bit of information that, it was one of the teams that he said that would be acceptable. When push came to shove the first time, wasn't ready to do it because at that point in the offseason, he still thought that maybe a team that he would have preferred, conceivably, would have jumped in. When that didn't happen, obviously he showed up here at Cardinals camp. But if the Astros are back in, Joe, would kind of make sense that they'd have the framework of a potential deal already put together, right? Like they did this once. Maybe this time it would come together if all parties are willing to kind of go back to the drawing board.
We want your thoughts as well as we do the show here today. First of 5 shows on Sports Hub STL here on this Saturday. Subscribe to the YouTube chat and give us your thoughts on the news today that is being reported by John Denton and others to this. So one of the big things, and you mentioned the Katie Woo article, one of the big things that kind of had Nolan Arenado kind of against going to the Astros initially was it was right around the same time Kyle Tucker was traded to the Cubs. Well, now that Christian Walker is with the Astros, kind of looking at what that team might look like. Alec Bregman not going to be back. The Astros decided not to re-sign him. He's with Boston. That third base position is open. But the Astros still, you look at what they have lost. Sure, they have Christian Walker, who's a really, really good player, the second best first base option out there on the free agent market this offseason outside of Pete Alonso. But they also traded Ryan Presley to the Cubs. They traded Kyle Tucker to the Cubs. They lose Bregman. Is this really a team that is moving forward? Is it a team that that is in contention to compete in the American League as a whole that would give Nolan Arenado that sense of security of being on a competitor?
That's obviously the question at this point, Joe, as to whether or not Arenado would find it acceptable this time. And it's really, camp has started, games are going, and all of this is still happening when we had sort of mentally put it out of our minds. Look, I think it would speak to the extent to which Arenado really would like to be with an organization that's really trying to put all feet forward on trying to contend and win now. But like you said, like there are aspects of what the Astros have done this offseason that I think the first time certainly had Arenado sort of wondering, like once they traded Kyle Tucker, is this just another organization? And I'd be uprooting my family and doing all these things to change teams just for a situation that's maybe not too dissimilar to the one that I'm already in. I don't really think it's a commentary from Arenado on his teammates or the players of the Cardinals. It's more organizational direction over the length of his contract. Is there one situation that reads is better than another? I think is what this would all boil down to. But just my kind of reading of the tea leaves, Joe, if this is something that is gaining momentum again, I just don't think that would happen unless they had some belief that Arenado would be willing to maybe say yes this time around. But like I said, that's just speculation on some news that just dropped earlier today.
Yeah, you have been there for the entirety right now of spring training. You have listened to Mo talk. You have listened to the players talk. Take me through what you think it would do to this team's psyche right now to where Nolan shows up on Sunday. He talks to the media. He practices for a week. He plays today. What does that look like, do you think, in that clubhouse if now suddenly he goes away?
It's interesting to kind of figure the way that would play out, Joe. I mean, from Arenado's perspective, playing in that stadium in Houston, where I think he would do pretty well there from a power perspective, the short porch with the Crawford boxes would help him out quite a bit. From the Cardinals' perspective, the way that they would look to move forward, from the Cardinals' perspective, Joe, I think you can go right back to the well on what we thought would be the case coming into spring. Nolan Gorman would be your third baseman. Donovan would play a lot of second base, and you'd now have room for Alec Burleson in your everyday lineup as the DH. The lineup that we saw today think with Arenado in it is very close to what you might be seeing on opening day for the St. Louis Cardinals. But if Nolan were to depart from that lineup, it would obviously change things sort of back to the notion of giving these guys the runway, the younger players that we have heard a lot about this offseason.
Let's go to the YouTube chat and see what the the listeners and the viewers are having to say. Walt Mosby says to assume trade talks are back, you also have to assume that they ended. Do you know for a fact that trade talks on Arenado ceased? Brenden, you were there when Mo talked last week. You were there for his first talk. Do you sense that at some point John Mozeliak and the Cardinals said, you know what, hey, we're moving forward and we are no longer taking calls on Arenado?
No, I think they always would have been willing to take calls. Were they as aggressive making them anymore is maybe a fair question, because Mozeliak worked pretty hard on this. And as it was reported by Katie Wu earlier in the week with The Athletic, they had a deal done, and it was with a team that was on Nolan's list. So I think from Mo's perspective, he thought then that this thing, then when it wasn't, that's kind of a bitter pill to take.
Back to the chat we go. Keith chiming in saying, please do this. It's time to see what we have with this youth movement and move them along. That's kind of what you're talking about with the move of Nolan Arenado and everything that it opens up with Gorman to third, with Donovan to second, and everything else. You know, Ryan Fagan and I sat here and talked yesterday about the center field position and just how, you know, Nolan Arenado being on the team causes that log jam now in center field, because the way everything shifts around, ideally, you would assume that it does put a player like Lars Nootbaar in center field, who we'll hear from later on in the show today. But you assume it puts him in center field when you put your ideal lineup out there. So yeah, it is a log jam that would open up so much for the Cardinals moving forward. What do you think the Cardinals will get in return? Nothing. I don't think. I think it's been clear from the beginning. Trading Nolan Arenado has nothing to do with what you're going to get in return. It has nothing to do with the prospects you're going to get. It has nothing to do with what the future of the team looks like. The future of the team is here. It's the players that you have in the system and that you're going to have on the roster opening day, plus a JJ Weatherholt, plus a Chase Davis, plus some of the other names that we have heard about so far this year. It's purely to drop the salary. It's purely to drop the money that the Cardinals are spending right now on Nolan Arenado. It's purely to open that up a bit and have that extra spending for the future when Chaim Bloom takes over as GM and when the Cardinals continue to move towards this youth movement. So it really has nothing to do with the return that you're going to get for trading a future Hall of Famer like a Nolan Arenado. It's that financial flexibility that they're going to have once it's complete, and then opening up everything else for that youth movement. So if you're digging through the Astros minor league system as a trade rumor like this starts to heat up again, you're doing it wrong. You're going to, because any player that comes back is not going to be somebody that has an impact on the Cardinals 2025 team, 26, 27, whatever. It's purely about the money they will get and what they will be able to do with that. Would you agree with that, Brenden?
I would. I'm trying to see if I've got you here, Joe. I think it would be more about the finances, and I would be curious if the Cardinals would be hoping for the same arrangement they would have had with Houston the first time financially, because they were going to take on reportedly 50 some odd million, and the Cardinals were going to pay just about 15, I believe it was. So that Cardinals would love to see happen the same way. It just has the leverage changed a little bit, knowing the Cardinals' position on this, and Houston maybe could get even a better deal than they would have before. But prospect-wise, I don't think you're going to necessarily be banking on big names coming back to St. Louis if a deal happens.